It's been many years since I made videos about the so-called West Memphis Three. Personally, I think the victims, Stevie, Christopher and Michael, should be or could be known as the West Memphis Three, even though I don't like the idea of, I guess, lumping victims together under some sort of collective noun and having the perpetrators kind of lumped together and given some sort of, useless anonymity, and I can never say that word. However, yeah, I'd kind of forgotten how culty and how intense, things are around this really serious case, because of course when I was making my videos, I had to incur a never-ending rumbeline of wrath from mainly Damien Eccles supporters, who would come in and say, you're talking about the person that saved my life. He's amazing. And he's not amazing. And years ago, before I'd made these videos, if I'd known that he had such a cult following, I would have wondered why. And then I found out why when I discovered his YouTube channel. And at first I thought, oh, who's this guy? What is this teaching? What sort of situation was he in where he's had to really endure, what's he got to offer? And then the second or third time it just dawned on me, this name and who this person was, because I started getting really creeped out. I had very strange vibes. I thought, I don't really actually want to be listening to this. I didn't know that, when there's this underlying darkness behind things that pretend to be healing, helpful, and that sort of thing. And all they're doing is sort of sucking people into some sort of, just a black void, just into a void. So I stopped watching. But anyway, years later, I ended up just making a few videos for this channel and realized what a movement there was behind mainly Jason Baldwin and Damien Eccles, because they are the ones that are putting themselves out together often. Jason not as often as, is it Justin? Oh gosh, I'm losing my mind. Jason not as often as Damien, but nevertheless. And of course the person, Jesse Miskelly, who was the person saying that the three teenagers committed the murders, well, that doesn't really, I guess, leave him in a position, does it, to go on the speaking circuit, etc. I believe the others have written all sorts of books, and Eccles, sets himself up as some sort of guru, okay? But I didn't really realize that there's kind of this, there's these other camps. Of course, there's people who, there's always the people who will believe, and it's their right to believe that the West Memphis Three are innocent. And I hadn't quite realized that, wow, there's an actual whole camp of people believing, Terry Hobbs actually committed the murders, or Terry Hobbs with someone else. So I've seen it said about Byers, Christopher's father, or about David Jacoby as well. And David Jacoby talks on YouTube. He's done some interviews, not as many as Terry Hobbs, because Terry Hobbs is fond of writing a book and some interviews, and that's all his prerogative. But if he doesn't want to be questioned, about what he was really doing on the night and before and after, then he should stay private. And it seems to me there's a particular thing that people sort of grab onto and then sort of run with, and it's a similar thing to something in the JonBenet Ramsey murder case, and that is food in the stomach. Now, people who have certain beliefs around JonBenet Ramsey's death really love to misquote things, or they just don't go and read the evidence and then quote it properly. They love to say that there was, undigested pineapple in her stomach, or there was a yellow substance in her stomach. This had to be pineapple. And they like to think that they can then extrapolate a time of death from that. And they are incorrect. And it does get exhausting writing in the comments underneath their comments. Actually, it was, this sort of brownish, maybe yellowish brownish, but definitely brownish greenish substance. It was not in her stomach. It had actually gotten as far as at least the duodenum, which, that's right there at the entrance to the small intestine. And so that's, thrown around a lot. And with Stevie Branch, one of these 8-year-old boys that was killed in West Memphis at Robin Hood Hills, this was in May 1993, so it's quite an historic case now, I guess. He had this substance, that could have been vegetable matter, right? And so now people, because they have learned that Pam Hobbs, Stevie's mother, was preparing green beans possibly, they say, well, he had a green substance in his stomach. And how they try to put this together is that Terry and Stevie Branch's paths must have crossed at the Hobbs home sometime after Pam was dropped at work, and that's not necessarily the case. So from what I can gather, Pam's picked up Stevie from school. It seems quite early, but she signed him out of school at 2:30. Maybe that was convenient for her. Maybe she was getting Amanda from a kindergarten or something. Amanda is Stevie's little sister. She picks him up at 2:30. They go home, and she says she didn't feed him. I had been wondering, well, maybe she just gave him some vegetables that she was preparing to snack on. But apparently he didn't have anything to eat after school. Imagine he would have been quite hungry as the afternoon progressed. And he asked to go and play with one of his friends, and off he goes. I think one of the friends didn't have a bike. Perhaps that was perhaps that was Christopher. But maybe he had a skateboard. But anyway, the two of the little 8-year-olds were on bikes. So Pam has said yes, but be home by 4:30. Terry's come home in the meantime, so he reckons he's finished work at about 3:30. He started work early in the mornings at that time, and he said the earlier he would start, the earlier he would finish. He's home mid-afternoon, and usually the family would eat together, and then Terry would drive Pam to work. They had more than one vehicle, but he would take her there and pick her up. Let's just call it loving and not controlling. Stevie's not home by the time they go to leave, and I'm wondering, does he have a key, or is the house just left unlocked so that he can actually get in? If the paths don't cross, but Stevie comes home while the family is out. And Pam's work, Catfish Island, it's not far away, and it's actually quite near Robin Hood Hills. from what I understand, without looking it up right this minute. And they stop off, I think they drop in somewhere just to see if Stevie, I can't remember, sorry, if it's with Michael Moore's family or with Christopher. So by this, whichever boy Stevie was better friends with, and then the other fellow joined in. They drop off and then they go to Pam's work. She's got to work from 5 to 9. And then Terry says that, he's going to go looking, and he takes Amanda, the little girl, to his friend's house, to the Jacobys. David Jacoby's wife, I think, was the friend of Pam, and so sort of by association, David and Terry knew each other. David played guitar as well as did Terry. So they had something in common, superficially. And David ends up going out with Terry to look, but their stories are quite different about the timing, because David reckons that from 6 to 8:30 he wasn't with Terry, that Terry and he had a drive around, they'd gone to these apartments, which they seem to check quite regularly. What were they called again? I made a jot of the name, somewhere starting with M. Was it Mayfair Apartments? Which again is sort of close to Robin Hood Hills. And they'd been told by a little girl that she'd seen some boys with bikes going into the woods. And when we say woods, it's kind of this big field, a big open space, but there's this particular drainage ditch, like this canal structure all running through, with those infamous, pipes over it, and just sort of, some trees, but really tangled and overgrown viney type foliage there. So not like this big woods. Don't imagine a pine forest or anything like this. This is in the steamy south, and it's, a lot of overtangled vines and just a few scraggly trees and things, with the creek water running through it. And then the manor apartments sort of going all the way up at the time to the edge of these woods. Now, Jacoby's saying, well, they didn't go and check there then, and maybe, hey, Terry thought, oh, well, I know where he is. He'll go home. I'll deal with him later, because if I go and get him now, then my evening's over. I'll just go and hang out with Jacoby again. We'll play our guitars. We'll learn the riff to Pretty Woman, and I'll go home, and then we'll go out and pick up Pam. I don't know, right? We don't know. And the thing is, it's hard to know what's going through Terry's mind, because there's so many different scenarios that he plays, that he's told over the years. And I've said about other people in other cases, I think sometimes people keep quiet about moments when they could have intercepted and changed history, because, of course, they're going to get the, why didn't you? If only you had, and they're probably struggling with, a sense of guilt when they've got nothing to do with anything, but, maybe could have intervened. They've got to live with that anyway. They don't need the world bloody making them feel worse, right? And maybe it's just something about that. Maybe it's about, look, I really should have tried harder. I wasn't actually looking very hard. And, I really feel bad about that. Or not that he feels bad, because I think he might even be a psychopath. I don't know. Just don't come for me. But that he just, he doesn't want to be answering to things like that. It's not for his ego to deal with. But, the stories change a lot is what I'm saying. And there's some weird videos with Jacoby. You know, he's very upset, and he cries and mumbles a lot, whereas, you know, the only, unless it's scorn, the only emotion Hobbs ever seems to show is mirth. You know, he laughs at really bizarre things, in my opinion. Okay. Now, it's kind of confusing. Now, sorry, and I'm going to confuse you anymore because it's not clear in my head. Jacoby says, look, you know, when Amanda was dropped off again, Terry was going to come back. So, you know, drop David off so David could get changed, maybe into some warmer clothes. I don't think there's anything necessarily weird about anybody changing attire. And to get some flashlights. But he says, you know, Hobbs, he didn't return until about 8 or 8 o'clock or so. And I think after that time he went to Byers, and the Byers were reporting, because they had reported their son missing, maybe at 7:15, and I think the constable Meeks, I think that policewoman Meeks was at Byers' house when Terry was outside, and Terry, I don't think, talked to her, so I might be wrong about the timing. It's really hard to work out the events and what's actually right, because I don't have like the court transcript in front of me where this might have been read out in court, but why wouldn't he talk to Meeks and say, hey, did you guys know that Stevie was with them? Because, you know, and he's missing too, he hasn't come home. But he goes and I think he talks to Byers. Maybe they go driving. And then they go to the Catfish Island restaurant where Pam was working. Hobbs says it at 9, but, you know, they called police. Hobbs called the police at 9:11 and reported Stevie missing. Now, they were only leaving at 4:45 from home, and they were going to make a call first and drive around a little bit looking for Stevie on the way to Catfish Island. So Catfish Island is really close, but instead they wait, you know, they're waiting for that 10 minutes at Catfish Island restaurant. Maybe because, look, they wanted to go across to the Robin Hood Hills. It eventuates that one of the boys' friends, Carlos, had a conversation with them at around 6 o'clock, he says, and he said that the boys were wanting to run away. Christopher had had a beating from John Mark Byers that afternoon, and he wasn't happy. Stevie, you know, wasn't happy. It's not just sour grapes on Pam Hobbs's family side. She changed her name back to Hicks, I believe. On the Hicks family side about Hobbs, it's just not. Look, you know, I think we can't write off a lot. I don't believe that Pam's sister was at the Hobbs' house that night to see for her own eyes Terry Hobbs cleaning his clothes, like she says. Maybe Pam told her that Terry did it. Things get pretty twisted like that. I don't know, but people make a meal out of a lot of things, right? Which is, you know, he didn't want the police there. I mean, why would they go and search the woods without first checking at the home again? I don't know. You'd think they'd want to dash home. And as a parent, if I imagine if I was the parent and I was that close to home, I think I'd tell the police to meet me at my house, like Mark Byers did. I mean, they were out searching the neighborhood, but they met the police at their house. And I think that's what I would too, but look, I don't know what we can make of things, right? But what I just wanted to say about Stevie having something in his tummy, the other children didn't, is that he may have, after Terry, Amanda and Pam had left to go to the restaurant to drop Pam off, Stevie could have come home and he could have thought, oh, I'm going to be in trouble anyway. When a man admits to beating a woman, so hitting a woman and beating children with a belt, and, will say, look, I just hit her once, and I, don't hurt the children with the belt. If a man is admitting that, they absolutely fucking are doing it a lot, wouldn't you think? How could it be that a man would admit it and say, hey, it was just the once? I just can't believe it. And if it was just the once, oh, sorry ladies, but you've got to get out of there. And this goes the opposite way. Men, if you were being abused, just get out of there, because you're going to hear every excuse under the sun. You're going to be gaslit. You're going to be manipulated. It's not worth it, Things can just escalate. And so we know, okay, and this is the thing, okay, this is the thing. I think a lot of times things happen like so for example, West Memphis 3, they're innocent. And so therefore people also think, hey, they are stellar guys, at least, that Baldwin and Eccles, stellar people. A little bit different, but they're amazing people. They could be innocent. Imagine, just say they were factually innocent, and they could be real scumbuckets, okay? And it's the same with Hobbs. Hobbs can be entirely innocent of all, especially of that crime of killing the 3 boys. It doesn't make him a stellar person. It doesn't make him, a great guy. And the only thing, he skirts around answering the questions. Now, maybe because he just thinks, oh, for goodness sake, just drop it. But any fool would know. All people want from him, the only thing they want to hear about is what he did that night. Why wouldn't they? That's what's intriguing. That's what people want to know. How did this go down? What time were these little boys killed? It's been proposed, I think through the courts, that it was 6:30 at the earliest and 8:20 at the latest. And people just want to know what's happening that evening, and maybe they just feel uneasy. Maybe they're in that Terry Hobbs did it camp because he won't just come out and say, look, I feel really bad because I had those reports that the kids are in the woods, and I could have just gone there, and instead, actually, I went somewhere else. Taking drugs, alcohol, they all deny it, but he blames Pam. Oh, her sister introduced her to the crystal. Oh, I tried it once. I didn't like it, does he take advantage of, the evening, Amanda being with his family friends, Pam being at work, Stevie, hey, he's not home. He can fend for himself if he gets there. Was he doing something like that, right? And he just doesn't want to say. And of course he wants to say that he was driving around. It just doesn't make sense about this time frame though, because he wasn't actually with Byers until later, or Pam Hicks's father, and that sort of thing. That was at later times. It's not at the times that people were questioning. And I know a lot of people will have some answers to this, and be able to answer it. That's great. I would like to know, but I would like to know why, when a query is put to Hobbs about Jacoby, he just very suavely, I don't know, glibly, whatever, very cleverly avoids it. Just sort of, his voice changes. He does sort of a bit of a laugh, and but then he just disses Jacoby. Oh, he's just a fool, or whatever, what a joke, So I don't know. I don't know what those two people think. It's clear maybe Jacoby has thought that Hobbs might have something to do with those little boys dying, being murdered, I mean. And maybe he feels a little bit guilty. Maybe that's all it is, because instead of encouraging Hobbs to get out and go out with him and search harder and longer, they were, having some drinks and playing guitar. Hobbs, of course, denies playing guitar. But I just feel like that could just be the crux of the matter. But of course, all these things feed the conspiracies. Sorry, but what I was getting at about the food, Stevie could have popped home, seen that no one was there, clearly, decided to have a snack, grab some of the dinner. I mean, we never hear, I don't know. Have we heard where Pam says, no, the dinner wasn't, there weren't leftovers? I mean, they would have put a plate aside for Stevie. Has she ever said it wasn't touched? I don't know. Had it been put away and they wouldn't notice that he's taken some out? I don't know, but I would like to know. I'd just like to know what happened to these two little boys. By 7 o'clock, I think that is a reasonable time, if not earlier, but by 7 o'clock to be calling the police. Poor Pam is at work, not hearing from Terry at all. Now, you'd think, so she's probably thinking he's made it home. In that case, I would think Terry should have called and said, hey, can you let Pam know Stevie's come home? And I feel like he maybe should have told her, hey, Stevie's not here. I've gotten home. He's not here. What should I'll just keep looking. It is bizarre, and this is why people don't trust him, don't like him, and it opens that door, to all the speculation and things like that. And, the type of dissonance that people have is often in these cases, that you'll find it in every true crime case that's covered, where, oh, well, if someone is or isn't guilty, then the converse is, or whatever, that, oh, they are good or are not good, sort of thing, It shows up, this dissonance shows up in the Delphi murders story, where Abby and Libby, Richard Allen has been convicted of their murders, and, the cops didn't do a great job, right? So, but the thing is, people that are really on the cops did a slack job, that, or they're in that conspiracy, they're corrupt. Therefore, Richard Allen is innocent, Well, they can be corrupt, they can be useless and covering their butts and all sorts of things, and Richard Allen can still be guilty. That's the sort of thing that I mean about this type of dissonance we get in, in and around these cases. And people like John Douglas and Jim Clementi's, they're not helping. John Douglas has proven that he's a mouth for hire. That's all you need to know. And they've got no business coming out and doing criminal profiles about people in 2010, when people have been convicted, and yes, they are released on an Alford plea, which, by the way, Damien Eccles, full well means that why would a county or a state release evidence to you for testing? You've pled guilty. They're not going to do that. That's what it's all about. If you wanted to do that, you should have stayed on death row fighting it. And then you could be MVACing the shoelaces. Huh? Surely he knows that it's not going to happen purely because of that Alford plea that his lawyer pushed for. But anywho, so, they say, oh, this is a personal cause homicide. And, this really feeds those theories. And, yeah. I don't know. Maybe Terry Hobbs was just really peeved off with Stevie, but thought that he would turn up home, didn't really have that care, you know, how a mother can sort of thing, or a father, but he was a stepfather, and you know, he's beating a kid with a belt. I don't think he's really caring if he's out on his bike too long after dark, right? Maybe that just, you know, that's just what it's all about. But him and Jacoby had gone to the Robin Hood Hills, you know, so to that woods, and they looked on both sides of the pipe bridge. On one side, I think that must be the side where these apartment buildings are, the Mayfair apartments. They've been torn down now, I think, or for the most part. On the other side was the Blue Beacon. It's a truck stop, and of course, well, a truck wash, you know, and that's got to make people curious, right? But, you know, there's things like Terry will say him and Pam, they saw, and this is not my terminology, guys, okay, you know, a black bum. So, you know, well, some people will say, oh, you know, this dark hobo. I would just say, you know, they saw a person that looked like he was homeless and moving along. And, of course, that brings in the Bojangles person that Meeks, again, went to. And, you know, I say, look, police people, just carry some kits in your car. It doesn't cost you anything but the packaging to actually take some blood samples and that sort of thing, right, from what might be a scene involved with a crime. It doesn't mean you have to go ahead and do testing on them, which is expensive, because you can keep investigating, but then you know you've got it. So I think, you know, people get frustrated about that, but you know, it may well be that Hobbs saw so-called Mr. Bojangles. Again, if you've seen someone and your little kids out there, I mean, I think I'd be quite concerned if I saw sort of a quite shadowy figure sort of thing, or this person that looked like maybe they are a little bit desperate and dangerous. You know, I would be extra worried about my son. You know, I would not be leaving it until I'm picking my wife up. And I just can't help feeling, though, that, you know, I mean, so obviously to me, and this is just my opinion again, to me, you know, just say the West Memphis 3 did not do this, you know, I would be looking right at Hobbs. You know, I can't imagine how the scenario went down. Some people want to say that he did run into Stevie back at home and punished him. How did they meet up then with the other boys? Were all 3 boys together at the house? I heard something, I can't remember what it was, who by, and that someone said they saw 3 boys going into a house, but I didn't think they were meaning the Hobbs house. But there's that issue of a hair, which statistically might be Terry Hobbs's, and it was in the shoelace tying Michael Moore's feet and hands together. You know, but hey, did Michael Moore, Stevie and Christopher, did they all go to the house? Stevie just grabbed something to eat, maybe just a mouthful off his plate or out of the fridge. None of the other boys did. And then they left. And Michael, I think it might have been Michael Moore, who was Stevie Branch's closer friend. And he would have played, in that case, at the Hobbses quite often, and he would have been in his school shoes. Don't imagine these kids had many pairs of shoes. He was apparently in his scout uniform, so maybe that's what he went home and changed into. And he's probably, if he's Stevie's friend and been at the Hobbses' home, he would have been there in his uniform. So, you know, there's transference. I hadn't realised Jacoby had some DNA at the scene as well. Look, if he's cruising around in Terry Hobbs's truck, you know, Terry Hobbs could have transferred DNA there. Just say he was the lone perpetrator. Or, you know, just when they're looking, they don't deny looking at the Robin Hood Hills and, you know, in the convoluted, I know you'll say this is convoluted, in the convoluted storyline that Jacoby gives and Hobbs gives, you know, they were there a few times. they kept looking at the woods, and I think it is because obviously it's an alluring place for kiddies to go, but they did have eyewitnesses saying that they thought they saw them go there or heading into there. And one boy saying they were running away, and it would be sort of a place that kids might go to run away to. It also strikes me that it's a place that it's the type of place that would be a beat, especially having a truck wash on the other side. In the towns and cities where I've lived, sort of those little woody places dotted around and things like that at certain types of parks, you tend to recognize that there'll be a beat. So, you do wonder about the nature of things and people going in there, and then what might have been seen there by 3 boys that shouldn't have been there or weren't expected to be there. But, on one hand, okay, sure, give someone the benefit of the doubt that not being concerned about an 8-year-old child being out when you were expecting him for family dinner, as was usual, at 4:30. No, why would you be bothered? And hey, beatings were regular at the time. Just the sign of the times, corporal punishment. Look, I just can't forgive that, because plenty of people in the times, and maybe it's sort of the upbringings and everything as well, but not everybody did beat their children, and Amanda was little, and he does admit he would hit his little daughter as well, and he would hit Stevie, and yes, that was his stepson, but he had raised him since 1 year old. He'd been in Stevie's life for a long time, and someone that's going to say too that they did, I hit her, but only once, I just don't believe it. So I do believe that he was violent. But here you go again, right? Dissonance shouldn't come into it. That thought or belief or understanding shouldn't crowd out everything to the tune of not being able to believe, well, it doesn't mean that he killed Stevie, Michael, and Christopher, right? And I think too many times that's where people go. But yeah, I just it's quite shocking, really, how there's a whole sort of this cult movement around Terry Hobbs, and also Terry Hobbs and someone else, whether it's Byers or Jacoby or these 2 other people, perhaps some, I think they were younger guys, I won't say their names, and with the aspersions, with the allegations, I should say, that they were in the woods because it was somewhere where men would go to have sex with other men, and they've caught the boys there. The boys have seen, and they've silenced the boys. A lot of male rage does come from internalized homophobia. So who knows? There could be some reason why Terry Hobbs wouldn't want to say what was happening for an hour and a half when he sort of thought he had some free time. But there could well be, and I know there's these sayings, there wasn't, the timing doesn't allow it. I understand that, between, and, because the boys were sighted around the neighbourhood at various times up until at least 6 o'clock, it sort of means that there's a time frame that doesn't count, which would be, between getting home from work and, whatever. And I also understand that perhaps there is a timeline that has been verified where Terry is with other people. But even in the deposition, you see, that's the thing. And I think this is the thing that really keeps feeding. It is because in the 2007 deposition, because Terry was deposed. I don't know if maybe his lawyer didn't, I don't know. Maybe he didn't quite understand what was going to happen when he wanted to take, is it Natalie, what's her name? Did I write it down? Natalie, I want to say Merchant, but I know it's not Natalie Merchant. Natalie Maines, is that it? So there's, rallies around freeing West Memphis 3 and getting them, getting Damien off death row and getting these boys out of jail, the men. And a lot of people in the public eye already were speaking up. So they have quite a lot of sway. And this Natalie lady, she was of the Dixie Chicks, but it's since been brought to their attention that Dixie, well, that's a loaded term. I think they've changed their names maybe to just the Chicks. But really she's pushing in speeches and things about this Terry Hobbs hair that was found with the boys, and that, once it's MVAC'd, once it's tested, get it tested, and you'll have your killer, He wanted to take her to court, sue her for defamation or libel or what have you. And so anyway, he's deposed. And oh gosh, that interview where he's been questioned by her lawyer, because of course now, well, they've got the legal ability, they've got the right to question him. Well, okay, well, let's talk to you about that night then. If is what she's saying libelous? Because is there good reason to think that this hair that was on this shoelace, that's not a lie? Is there good reason to think that, it just needs further testing? Hey, just to rule you out or in. And people sort of seem to imagine in their mind's eye, they're picturing Terry Hobbs's actual hair. I mean, look, it may well be, right? But it might not be. It's sort of like 1.5 million people in America. So what percentage of that would be in West Memphis 3? But it's still, it's not like, it's a certain figure, certain percentage chance, not like 99 or 80% or something like that. But that's just from really basic testing that they'd done. They didn't do anything really in depth. And yeah, nothing's been published since. And I know the West Memphis 3 was saying we're going to have it published, and it's been 5 years. Of course, nothing's come out. But of course, it's probably because why would the state release any evidence? It's done and dusted as far as they're concerned, right? They don't want to open a bag of worms, even though they've got the safety net of having the Alford plea, whereby they can't be sued for wrongful conviction and wrongful incarceration and all of that malarkey. Yeah. So, this case, it's just, I guess, for the families and everything, and, maybe for Terry Hobbs himself too, the wounds that keep opening up. David Jacoby is really, really distressed to this day. It is bizarre. Maybe he's just a very, very sensitive man who's, maybe who knows? It does come across like he just wants to say, look, I think Hobbs did it, right? But again, that doesn't mean that's what the truth is. It just means that David Jacoby has got some doubts, and he just doesn't have the full story, and he'll never know. It would put him to peace to know, probably. Maybe he's feeling like, why were we playing this guitar? I mean, that's stuck in his mind. And so I think it's stuck in his mind because he does feel bad about it. And that's what makes me think that it did happen. And Hobbs, of course, just denies it. And he's probably thinking, why on earth were we playing guitar? We could have been out. Maybe if we'd searched the words again, or, searched them earlier or searched again, just been out there, we would have found the boys, and just they would have gone home and they wouldn't have been murdered. And it could just be this deep regret and remorse. it's making him cry. And some people think it's, well, because he was there. You know, there's always going to be people. You can't stop people thinking what they'll think. But, you know, I guess, look, people are going to give, and you have to respect that it's up to individuals who interview Hobbs to give him those graces. I wouldn't give a shit about having a conversation with him. I just want to know. I just want some things answered. That's, and if he won't, well, he's showing himself that there is something there, whatever it is. Maybe, you know, who knows? But maybe he's just sick and tired of being asked about it. But he's asked about it because every time he gives these rundowns on what happened and everything, he's very evasive. It's like the way that he says about Jamie Hicks Jr., you know, in the deposition, the Maine's lawyer's saying, so what about when Jamie Hicks was shot? Terry says, no, he wasn't shot. He got hit by a bullet. Because the Hicks family feel like he did mean to shoot him. And obviously Hobbs is trying to say, no, the gun just went off, and sadly it hit him in the stomach. You know, and yeah, they're not, you know, they're not the world's biggest fans of Hobbs, let's just say that. For that and for many reasons. But, you know, he did shoot. He did shoot Hicks. But, of course, you know, Terry's always got to be the way that he frames things. And he does this around so many things. And especially when it comes to around that night. Wouldn't you remember if you were the one that had the conversation with the police? But he doesn't want to answer. Why did you... And during that conversation, why was it that you said meet us at Catfish Island restaurant and not at the home? And things like that. Because he just doesn't want to answer. So he won't... You know, he's got... And you can't tell me a person in that position wouldn't know. Things that are hearsay, and I'll wrap this up in a minute because I thought this would just be 15 minutes. Things that are hearsay, for example, though, right? And you have to say, all right, that's hearsay. I can't take that on board. If you're in, you know, it'd be like a jury being told something strike that. The objection sustained. Jury, put that out of your mind, something they've heard. Well, he had dated this woman, Sharon Nelson, who says that Terry from time to time would talk about it and say that, you know, he'd found them and that they were buried underwater. Look, maybe he did find them and didn't know what to do, but that's just so bizarre, isn't it? Why would you be concerned about being the one that found these little boys? Why would you try to hide that and just let it play out some other way? But you know, that story, you have to pretend you didn't hear it. It's hearsay, right? No doubt Hobbs would deny it. And you know, maybe a lot of what Pam, Hobbs's sisters, say as well, because they've got a reason to sort of really push things up. But I'd say, you know, it's a case of where there's smoke, there's fire. And, you know, it's probably mainly true. Maybe they're embellishing, maybe not. Gosh, I actually hope so, because it's quite heinous what the allegations are about abuses and things that Terry Hobbs would dish out. And particularly when it comes to Amanda's daughter. And I don't know what to believe there. And I think she's a, you know, obviously a lost soul. She lost her brother Stevie to this really violent crime when she was in a very formative age. And trauma, when it's hitting like that, you know, and by that I just mean trauma when, you know, you are a victim of trauma at those young ages, pre-verbal and toddler and, you know, young child. It changes the person's brain. Talked about this a little bit with regards to Virginia Giuffre. It does. And, you know, these people can become very, very vulnerable. They might become either, you know, sort of walled off, or maybe they're really vulnerable to manipulators. And people, because they've got all their own narratives to sell and their own reasons, people get used. And someone like Amanda would have been very vulnerable to being used and manipulated into saying things that maybe didn't happen. One of the allegations made by her is that, you know, people, I think, was it people making the films were feeding her with drugs. She was a drug addict, and they were getting her drugs in return for her to say certain things. Because obviously, I mean, I guess if you're saying that a certain group of people are innocent, you want to offer up on a platter somebody who might be guilty. Or, you know, that's that reasonable doubt thing, isn't it? Oh, the Odinists. Oh, the whomever or whatever, you know, as long as it's not the people that you want to tell people are innocent. So, yeah, a lot of people are clearly still suffering decades later. But yeah, sorry, I don't, you know, Terry Hobbs is genteel Appalachian man. I mean, you know, no, he's not gentrified, and I'm not buying it. But his life is his life, you know. But I think if he's going to do interviews, there shouldn't be stipulations on them. What's the point of talking to people unless you're getting closer to, I mean, maybe it just doesn't matter anymore. It probably, look, you know, maybe it just doesn't. And bygones be bygones and all of that, but it's, you know, that it is going to intrigue people. But maybe, you know, some people have that infallibility, you know, just be like the Pope, you know, John Paul II, the infallibility clause where, you know, within, they just can't be responsible for anything, right? They take, you know, no accountability. They don't want to, you know, everything has to be roses. Diminish the bad and boost up the good. And maybe that's a reason why someone might very skillfully skirt around, not everything, very wide open about some things, and suddenly zip. Yeah, it makes someone like me really curious. And maybe it should just mean that look, you're just being rude, nosy, whatever, right? But hey, it rattles my brain. All right, that's really long. This is going to take hours to upload. I'll see you guys later.